Hello again, and welcome to the St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends Podcast. Tom Calhoun here to shine a light on the stories of those instrumental in blues history. The Blues Legends Podcast is presented by Sarah Honda, O'Fallon, Illinois. Check out their 618 Sarah Bucks offer at sarahhondaofallon.com. A participating sponsor, the Gateway Grizzlies. Lots of attractive promotions coming up in the next few weeks. Visit gatewaygrizzlies.com for details. On this episode, it's a visit with blues legendary broadcaster Ken "Oh Baby" Wilson. I don't have time to tell you all the big-time experiences and broadcasting memories that Ken has compiled over the years, so I would urge you to Google Ken Wilson and become amazed at all he has done. Of course, he was a favorite of blues fans on the games from the early 80s to the early 2000s. We'll get started by talking about some personal Ken Wilson history, and then his trek to the very top of the broadcasting business in baseball and hockey. Part 1 of our Ken Wilson episode in 60 seconds.
When it's time to find your next car, what's changed in your life? What's driving you to start the process? What are you really looking for? These are the questions we're asking at Sarah Honda. We believe in real communication, real problem solving, and trustworthy long-term relationships with our customers. We're part of your community, and we want you to be part of ours. At Sarah Honda, the experience drives everything. You've got a lot going on in life, and you depend on your car to get you to places you need to be. So when it's time for maintenance or repair, we know you need it done fast and done right. Convenience and quality customer service with team members you can trust. That's what you're looking for. We'll get you safely back on the road and back to your busy life. At Sarah Honda, the experience drives everything.
And on this episode of the St. Louis Blues Legends Podcast, we have a legend from the earlier broadcasting days of our St. Louis Blues. We have the great Ken Wilson with us from his home in Portland, Oregon. Ken, thank you so much for your time. Good to see you again.
Tom, good to see you, and always good to talk blues hockey.
Yeah, and as you know, and as I've explained before we started recording, this is kind of a walk down memory lane, so we like to touch on some of your early life a little bit, first of all, to lay the groundwork for how Ken Wilson got to St. Louis and started with all those "oh babies" back in the day. So you're a Detroit guy, right? Born in Detroit and grew up in Michigan. Tell us a little bit about your family background, brothers, sisters, moms, dad, and all that.
Not very complicated, Tom. My parents were very young when I was born. This was just after World War II. Mm-hmm. I think my mother was 20, my dad was 21. He was a mechanical engineer, worked for the same company for 40 years. He loved baseball. And I had no brothers, I had no sisters. We lived humbly, maybe lower middle class. My childhood was ideal. My dad played baseball with me all the time. Then I got interested in hockey when I was 11. Well, actually, when I was like 9 or 10, I remember my dad took me to a Red Wings game at the old Olympia with our neighbor across the street and his son. And all I remember is, I'm not sure why he took me to an NHL game. This would have been probably 1955, 1956. And I remember being in the balcony, and I remember only two things. My dad says you can have one food item, one and only one. And I looked, and when I looked down at the ice, I saw the lights. They had old lights hanging from the ceiling. And we were in the balcony, and they were down so low that they looked like they were placed on the ice. Yeah. That's what I remember about my first National Hockey League game. Yeah. And at about that time when I was 11, a good friend of mine said, I'm going on Saturday to try out for a hockey team. Do you want to go with me? Tom, I probably had skated once or twice. I don't believe, maybe I had skates. I'm not sure. but I know I didn't have hockey equipment. Somehow I said yes. And I went to this tryout, and we're talking in a park where they flooded an area.
Yeah.
And in Detroit, you could get away with that in the wintertime.
Sure.
And they'd come by and because there's a lot of snow, right? Every once in a while, they'd sweep it off. And I remember the deep ruts in the ice.
Yeah.
I don't remember how I got equipment. I don't remember any of that, but I'm 11 years old. The team is the Redford Raiders. And I play that season on the Redford Raiders. And I guarantee you, I could hardly skate. And
Huh.
then I got to go to more Red Wing games, and Gordie Howe was the story. Okay.
Sure.
I'd say you're pretty lucky if you grew up with Gordie Howe.
You bet.
We're talking big time, right?
Mm.
He was the guy. And
Like
he was
in St. Louis, Gordie Howe.
I to this day feel fortunate to have grown up with Gordie Howe.
Sure.
Because when I was just a kid, he was already in the league 7 years. But, he was probably getting into his prime. He's probably 25, 26, 27. So I'd go to games every once in a while. And then I got better and I could play a little bit and got on some better teams and played hockey for 6 years in Detroit. And we'd go into Ontario and play some pretty good teams with the Canadian young players. And so that was hockey. Hockey was everything to me. And I would stay home on Saturday night. We didn't have much room in our house, but we had a little third bedroom that barely had a chair and a couch and an old TV. And on Saturday night, I'd watch Hockey Night in Canada.
Sure.
Foster Hewitt, Bill Hewitt, Danny Gallivan from the Forum in Montreal. And that's where I got the idea of how to broadcast hockey, the way they did it.
Yeah.
And believe me, they did it. And then the Red Wings would typically play in Montreal or Toronto on Saturday night. Then they'd get on the train with the other team and train down to Detroit and play Sunday night at the Olympia. So I'd watch the game on Saturday night, and then Sunday, I'd grab the Sunday sports section, put $1 or $2 in my pocket, walk 4 blocks up to the trolley bus. I'd get on the trolley bus, 25 cents. I'd get off in front of the Olympia near downtown Detroit. I'd have my hockey jacket on, have a couple bucks in my pocket. I'm alone. I got nobody with me. I'd be out in front of the Olympia, and if luck was with me, the guy would come up to me and say, "Hey, son, you a hockey player?" I go, "Yeah." He said, "Would you like a ticket?" He handed me an extra ticket. And I'm in this deal for 25 cents each way on the bus. This is a good deal. And if I didn't get the free ticket, Tom, I grabbed $2. I got $2. I got a standing room only ticket.
Mm.
And I'd go into the arena. There were only 12,500 seats, so it wasn't a huge arena. I'd go into the first level, which they call the arena seating. I'd go down. I'm probably 12 to 12 rows from the ice. I'd plop down, put the paper down on the step, plop down, and enjoy the game. so,
Folks,
so
I think
I'm a true hockey fan as a kid.
You are obviously that, and you played a little hockey and baseball in high school. Wikipedia tells me, and folks, I can already tell. I was going to touch on a lot of the things that Ken has done in his broadcasting career, where he's gone, what he's done, how he got where we are. But I think this is headed towards Ken Wilson story time, and I think we better focus on that. So you go to Hawaii, you get the Seattle Mariners job, you wind up here in St. Louis. Sports Time Cable was the network back in those days, and you also at one point in 83 through 85 were the voice of the Cincinnati Reds baseball team and broadcast Pete Rose's 4,192nd hit to break Ty Cobb's record. What do you remember about that, Kenny?
Well, I remember all the hoopla, of course, 1985. I was also doing Cardinals games.
Sure.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
That was one of the strangest things in my career. There was one season where I was doing Reds TV, Cardinals TV, and Cardinals radio. Mm-hmm. And I had one weekend, I think it was at Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, where on Friday night I did the Cardinals broadcast. Then on Saturday night, I did the Reds broadcast. And I'm telling you, I didn't know who I was broadcasting for.
What city you were in? Huh?
Yeah. But the Pete Rose thing, the thing that was interesting about Pete Rose, you knew it was coming. Okay. Most things in sports, as you know, and most people know, they're a surprise. Something unusual happens. You don't go to the event thinking, hey, something unusual is going to happen tonight. But we all knew Pete Rose was going to get the hit eventually. And I was working with Joe Morgan, who might be the finest baseball analyst I ever worked for or worked with. And he went on to have an excellent career with the networks. So he and I are doing the telecast. And I mean, the place is jammed, right? Everybody's talking about it. It didn't happen last night. He only needs one more hit. And Eric Shaw's on the mound. San Diego Padres are there. Steve Garvey's playing first base. The Reds are ready to go. And it's the only time I ever did this in my career. I wrote down what I was going to say. And it
Yeah.
wasn't out of fear that I would screw it up. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I knew when it happened, if I just went, I'd be fine. But I knew it was going to be played over and over and over and over again. And it still is played to this day. So I wanted to make sure that I got it right. And I especially wanted to be sure that I got the follow-up right. Here's the pitch, da-da-da, here's the hit, there he is, he's safe, da-da-da-da-da-da. But then you've got your 7 minutes of cheering and fireworks. And then you've got to follow with something that's maybe more poetic or maybe more long lasting. You got to bring in the moment. You've got to bring in his dad, what it means to the town, what it means to him. So I had written that out, 2 or 3 sentences. I had the one sentence, which was something like, here's the 2-1 pitch from Shaw, swing and a drive to left center. There it is. Pete Rose breaks Ty Cobb's record. That's hit 4,172.
Yeah.
And then everything breaks loose. Then you got to come back, and Pete's there looking up at the sky. And that's when you got to mention his dad, right?
Sure.
So you got to, this isn't just a fly by the seat of your pants. You got to be thinking, I've got to say this at this point when this shot is there. So I had 2 or 3 sentences to cover that. But I think that's probably the biggest event I've ever done.
Sure.
I would guess, and probably the most long lasting.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, in light of what's gone on since and Peter's passed, about his eligibility now for the Hall?
Well, he'll get in, and he'll get in soon, and I think that's the proper thing to do. He and I would sit when he got traded from Montreal back to Cincinnati to be a player manager. He and I would sit in the dugout in the springtime, and I'd be sitting there alone with him. And he was much more, I remember now, he was much more focused on being a manager than he was being a player. Mm-hmm. And he would say to me, and the conversation goes just like this. He'd be on my left. I'd be sitting there, first base dugout, Riverfront Stadium. Hitting's going on. Things are happening. No one's around. Pete would go, Bruins, Rangers. Because he knew I was an NHL announcer, right?
Yeah.
He'd go, Brewers, Rangers. I go, what do you want to know? He says, well, I want to know who's going to win. And I'd say something like, games in Boston. Rangers lead the series 2-1. This is game 4. Bruins win 3-1. And he goes, okay, thanks. And that happened more than once. Never baseball. Okay.
No.
Never baseball. I mean, he probably figured he knew more about baseball than I did.
You did, yeah.
But he knew that I knew more about hockey than he did. And my wife laughs at me, but I can typically call a game in terms of the result many times before the game starts, or especially if I see the first half of the period.
Yeah.
I can tell you who's going to win the game, 2 goals, 4-2, maybe 5-3. And she goes, "How do you know that?" I said, "Two reasons. I've seen a million games and I'm old." That's all you. That's that's all you need to know.
That's
I
it.
mean, I can tell you what's going to happen. Not all the time,
Yeah,
but a lot of the time. So
sure.
so that was the play with Pete. But Pete's a kid of the streets. Okay,
Yeah.
everybody knows that. And I'm working with Joe Morgan. Okay,
Mhm.
Joe's was very smart. And John, everybody call him Johnny Bench. He's an interesting name. He's Johnny Bench. If you know him well, you call him John, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, right.
But Joe would tell me that he and John spent a lot of time with Pete, trying to get him to see the light, trying to see him to get things straight. And he said they were so frustrated. We
Mm-hmm.
just can't. But he can. Here's a guy on the street with two guys that are real smart people.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't make any sense with him.
Mm.
Just couldn't, you know. He was a gambler, and you know, he
He
just
was
wasn't
fun.
going to go home and have dinner with the wife and the kids. You know, he's a street guy, and that's what killed him. And uh, you know, I thought even before he passed away, I was kind of on the fence. I thought he should become eligible, could be reinstated.
Yeah.
The only argument I would make against it is if you reinstate one person, then that opens the gates to reinstate a lot of other people.
Yeah.
What I then said to myself was, well, if you go to prison for 50 years and with good behavior, they let you out after 30, why can't we good behavior Pete and and reinstate him and give him a chance to be in the Hall of Fame? I think what's disappointing is, especially if you saw the documentary a couple years ago, uh, Pete wasn't as forthcoming even then as he should have been, and he was over 80 years old. But I think you get to the point was, let him in when he's alive.
Yeah.
What have we accomplished in the last 5 years by not having Pete get in the Baseball Hall of Fame? What have we accomplished by having his son give the speech at Cooperstown?
Right.
It's like doing it halfway to me. But I'm all for it. I think I don't justify his actions, but I think by this time, forgive and forget and let him in.
There you go. Ken Wilson with us on the Blues Hockey Legends podcast. Let's get back to hockey a little bit. One of the more important games you were a part of broadcasting was the Monday Night Miracle game in '86 at the old arena. I was in there watching the dust come down from the ceiling the night that Doug Wickenheiser scored the overtime goal against Calgary. What are your thoughts on that particular night?
Well, it was, that's one of those things you don't expect.
Yeah.
This is not Pete Rose's hit. This is, how could this happen? And when I look back on it, what I remember the most is doing what I always did before the game, talking to Jacques Demers,
Mm.
talking to him. I was doing the game on ESPN. So I was on the national telecast with Bill Clement. Dan Kelly was north of the border doing the game on the national telecast in Canada, which would tell me that the Blues didn't have the two worst broadcasters in the world if they both were doing the same game on a national feed. But anyway, I remember I got a lot of information from Jacques before the game, which was always true. And when we had our production meeting, Bill Clement, who was the analyst, my theory always has been the analyst is the guy with the inside. He's the guy that's going to, if the analyst doesn't do sidebars and interesting stories and stuff about players and strategies, what's he going to do? I mean, I know what I'm doing. I'm describing action. Bill Clement's the analyst. He's going to do all the side stuff. He tells the producer, he says, hey, producer asks the question, he says, just go with what Ken says. Because Ken sees the Blues every game. Ken knows the Blues inside and out. So let's go, let's focus on what information Ken has for this telecast. And then we did the open down from the press box down to the left entryway where the Zamboni came in and out before much was going on. So he had the rink behind us when we did the opening on ESPN, pre-recorded it. And, you know, the game was a nice game. You know, nice game. Way you go. Looks like fun. And, you know, you get to that situation, and it was almost a broken play. And I really, and when I listen back to it, which I haven't done in a long time and I haven't done very often. I mean, I can tell I was sort of on it, but I kind of struggled a little bit because it was like, you know, the puck it just didn't go from, you know, it didn't go from Federico over here to Wickenheiser. It was like it hit a skate and deflected, and then all of a sudden Wickenheiser buries it, and it was hard for me to get all that in the description. But you know, as time has gone on, I guess the 2019 winning the Stanley Cup is probably the biggest thing that's ever happened in Blues history. But I think a lot of people think, you know, the Monday Night Miracle was really, really something. And the thing is, I think you were there, and there were a lot of empty seats by the time that baby ended.
Yeah, because it
So I don't
was
think,
such a lopsided situation for a long time. The Blues
yeah,
pulled it out of nowhere.
nobody thought, not many people thought that it was going to be a great finish. And now everybody that lived in St. Louis at the time thinks they were there at the game.
Right. So tell us where "Oh Baby" came from. What's the story behind that? Is there was that a natural thing, or did you think about that beforehand?
It was rather natural. Um, I think people that have heard my baseball or heard my hockey going way back, I'm not much on cliches or trick sayings or nicknames. I've never done nicknames. No
Yeah.
one's ever said anything about that to me.
Huh.
50 years. I have never, the only nickname I believe I've ever used was I said Babe Ruth rather than George Herman Ruth. Otherwise, I would say I've never used a nickname. And you know, I've always seen myself as a journalist. Okay. And to me, that means tell it like it is, tell the truth, don't embellish it, make it as fair and balanced as you can possibly do it.
Journalism degree, University of Michigan. There you
That
go.
that's my background. That's what I am. I'm a journalist. Now I'm going to go back and say that I heard a long time ago that a baseball announcer is what is baseball announcer is part journalist, part fan, and I might remember later, part fan, part journalist,
Part
and
cheerleader.
and sort of cheer. You know, you got to sell tickets, right?
Yeah.
So that's always was always a tough balance. But so I wasn't into sayings, so to speak. Not that they haven't been some good ones. And I would on occasion say "oh baby" at home without ever thinking about it. I had no idea what the heck I was doing. And then apparently I said it one night on a game by accident. I didn't plan it, I didn't think about it. And my wife says to me, and I don't think she watched many games at all. She was a smart woman, still is. and, and she said to me, "That was exciting. Why don't you do that more often?" And I said, "No, it's just not, you know, he shoots, he scores. Good enough.
Yeah.
It was good enough for Foster Hewitt. It's good enough for Ken Wilson. I'm in." And she said, "No, I think you ought to do it." And so that was kind of like the permission for me to do something I would certainly typically would never, ever do. And then people kind of caught on to it. And then the battle, as you can imagine, was to not overuse it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to use it at exciting moments in a hockey game, how many hockey games are there with none or one exciting moment? There's typically four or five,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
So, you know, that was always a battle for me. I didn't want to overuse it. And I'm sure there's people that go, "Oh, what do you mean?" I get so tired of hearing it. It's unbelievable. You used it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to use it when I felt myself just getting so excited in very sincere excitement. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
When I was excited, I was sincerely excited. I loved the game. I loved the moment. I was into it. I was excited. And when I went, oh, baby, that was just kind of the culmination of it. So that it just it wasn't like I sat down one week and said, I got to come up with something. That was truly not the case.
There was quite a few old babies during Brett Hull's 86 goal season, I imagine.
I think I I realized Brett scored over 700 goals. I'm guessing I must have done over 500 of them.
Sure.
And I'm guessing a few of them had an old baby
Hmm.
here and there.
Yeah, I have the
So,
distinction of announcing all of his goals in a Blues uniform at either the arena or the new building. So
yeah.
that's been a lot of fun.
Grizzlies fans, we have two epic nights coming your way at Arsenal BG Ballpark. Thursday, August 7th, it's bingo at the ballpark with Extreme Bar Bingo. Gates open at 8:30, bingo's from 9 to 10:15, and first pitch is at 10:45. Win prizes every game. It's free, fun, and family friendly. Then, on Thursday, August 14th, celebrate St. Louis Browns Night, presented by St. Louis Browns Historical Society. Gates open at 5:30, first pitch is at 6:30 with a Pete Gray bobblehead giveaway and jersey off the back auction. Don't miss a moment, only with the Gateway Grizzlies.
So, okay, let's move forward a little bit. You come back after doing a couple of years of Blackhawks game and get brought in to work with Dan Kelly. Was that daunting at all, coming in and working with Dan on games because of his reputation?
That's a good question. And I've dealt with that in recent years, trying to put some things together,
Mhm.
actually in writing a book, which is another story, because I
Okay.
thought about that and I'm going, well, I had done 2 seasons of the Blackhawks as their lead guy on TV with Dale Talon.
Mhm.
And then I got hired by Sports Time, which was a combination of the brewery, uh, TV people that had WLWT in Cincinnati. They had KDSK in St. Louis, and I think Telecommunications, a cable company out of Denver. They started Sports Time, and it was basically a sports cable network in the Midwest. And a guy named Rex Lardner, who was an executive at CBS Sports, came over to Sports Time to put it all together. And he got a hold of me. This is 83, 84. Second season I'm doing the Blackhawks. He gets a hold of me and he says, hey, we're doing this. We'd like you to come over and do the Blues. I go, oh, okay. What else you got? He says, well, you're doing Cincinnati television. We're going to have a 50-game package of Cincinnati baseball. We'd like you to do that. I said, oh, now you're talking.
Mhm.
He says, but you got to leave the Blackhawks and come and do 25 St. Louis Blues games. I said, what else you got? He says, we want you to do one of our college basketball conferences. I said, which ones you got? He says, in the Big Eight. I said, I'll do the Big Eight, which I did with Lucius Allen, the great UCLA player.
Right.
And then he called me, and I was aware of Dan Kelly because when I was in college, I heard him on KMOX up in Ann Arbor. I was a radio dialer
Right. Right. Like a
as,
lot.
as a kid. I mean, I listened to all the stations. And, I go, well, this guy's pretty darn good. And, I used to Danny Gallivan and Foster Hewitt. And Bruce Martin in Detroit was very good. Wasn't quite at that level, but he was one of the better broadcasters. And I said, well, and then I said, we got a deal. And then Rex calls me and he says, the Blues would like Dan Kelly to work with you on the Sports Time Blues telecasts. And I said, I hear you. And what you'll do then is you'll work with Dan on the over-the-air telecasts of the Blues.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, this is good. I'm going to do more hockey. I'm happy.
Right.
And Dan and I don't know if we really knew each other or not from the 2 previous seasons when I did the Blackhawks. I'm sure we must have said hello, but we were certainly not, bosom friends by any means. And we got together and what are we going to do? And the deal was that game one, he would do 2 periods and I would do the second period.
Mm-hmm.
And the other person would be the analyst. Then the next game, I would do 2 periods and Dan would do 1 period. And we did that for 4 years.
Right.
And, so I was doing the same thing he was doing. And I don't recall ever reading or hearing anybody going, well, that Wilson guy, he's terrible. He can't hold a candle to Dan Kelly, which could have happened, right? It could have happened. Could have happened. Why in the heck are you doing 2 periods and Kelly's doing 1? You're a piece of crap. And he's been around forever and he's the greatest hockey announcer the world has ever heard. That never seemed to happen.
Yeah, you were immediately accepted, I think, in this market.
Yeah. And he was tremendous, okay, to work with. I mean, we never had a crossword. Nothing ever happened except I thought for a young guy, and I was pretty young then, that I wanted to be very professional. And he was truly a pro, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm going, we're 2 pros. We know what we got to do. I think I'm decent. I'll get better. And he's really good. And we're going to do the games. And it seemed to, everybody seemed to be happy.
I think
And
so.
then when he was gone, sometimes I'd do the radio alone. And that seemed to be happy. So, we were fine together. And I guess in retrospect, I didn't see it as a dangerous, huge challenge. Okay.
Right.
I just thought, well, I'm gonna come in and do games, and I know what I'm doing. I can do a game.
Yeah. And you did.
And so I didn't. Now, how many years later? 50 years later, I'm going, well, that was probably a little bit more of a challenging situation than I thought. And when I look back, what people maybe forget or didn't know was after he and I worked together for maybe a season, and he was trying to do, hockey in Canada. He was doing some ESPN games. So lots of times he wouldn't even show up. Yeah. I'm there with Blake Dunlap or somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing the whole game, right? Because he's not there to do Blues hockey. And what happened was all of a sudden he says to me, I've recommended to ESPN that they hire you. And I don't think much of that. ESPN gets a hold of me. The next thing I know, I'm doing the national telecasts on ESPN.
He didn't
Stanley
have to.
Cup. Huh?
He didn't
Stanley
have
Cup.
To.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, I'm just, they need a guy and I'm available and I'll go do the games and I'll work with Bill Clement and, I'll have a good time and I'm happy. And the strange thing was I got paid less to be on ESPN than I was getting paid by the Blues.
How about that?
That's hard to believe because don't for a minute think that the Blues were big spenders. So
Never did think that.
yeah, when I look back, Tom, I think that was very kind of Dan to recommend to them that they hire me to be their main guy on their NHL package.
Sure it was. Yeah.
Didn't strike me that much at the time. But as time has gone on, I realized, wow, he must have thought, I'm pretty good. That Ken's pretty good. He's not going to recommend me if I'm terrible.
Sure.
So I'm going, he must have had some respect for me. And I certainly had respect for him. And that's why it worked.
Podcast fans, my visit with Ken goes on for another good long while. We talk about his acceptance by the Blues fan base, some current events going on with the team, and why he's doing baseball broadcasting in Australia. That's coming up in part 2 of our Ken Wilson Blues Legends podcast. Thanks for being with me for another episode of the St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends podcast. We'll have another legend coming up soon, so stay tuned to our social media for news on who that legend might be. Visit PAGuyTom.com or BluesHockeyLegends.com and sign up for our Legends email notifications. The Legends podcast is also available on the Scoops Sports Network at scoopswithdannymac.com. Video of the podcast is published the Monday after the Friday release of the audio. As always, please like and share on Facebook, X, and Instagram, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It all keeps the Legends podcast alive and well. Tom Calhoun here saying thanks for being a fan, and let's go Blues!